Hey everyone, this is Jason Clemmons, and you are listening to Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, right here on this beautiful Wednesday evening, December 13th. And we're coming to you right here from the studios at the Rock Health and Wellness Center and on 98.7 Walk by Faith Radio and 1420 AM Lubbock Christian Nation. And our three favorite social media sites at this point: Facebook, YouTube, and X. So if you guys are out there, you're listening to us, thank you. Thank you for listening to the show. I hope you guys have had a fantastic day. Hope everything's worked out for you and you've had just things have gone your way today. We know that if you've listened to the show for a while, you know that half of them have and half of the things went for you and half of them didn't. And that's the way life works, and that's balance. So I hope you had a balanced day out there. We've had a good day. We've been busy all day long. Had some opportunity to take a little bit of break in the middle of the day, have a time to just breathe for a little bit. It was kind of a nice little hour off or two that we had in the middle of the day. So it's been great. We're going to get into the book tonight. Wednesday night is our book review night that we do. We go back through all the books that I have read at some point along the way that have given me the information that I share with you. Very little of anything that I share with you is authentic, as you know by now. All of this stuff is learned somewhere along the way. About the only thing that's authentic is the delivery and the packaging. And you can tell that that's authentic because nobody else would deliver it this way, I'm sure. So that is a little bit of my own thing. But what I do with these books is I read them, and a lot of them I've gotten the information from at places like a seminar that I've been to, or some of my friends that are chiropractors give me a book to read, or I have a patient that comes in and gives me a book to read. And so I try to take all those books and make something out of them. Try to take my I guess my philosophy on that is that, or the way that it happens, I don't even know if that's really a philosophy, but the way that it happens is you look through it on your lens, right? However you would read a book, you would be reading it from your history and from your experiences and from the lens that you carry with yourself. And so you might read the same identical book that I read, and we might end up with two different takes from it. You're like, oh, that's not what I got. And it's like, well, I got something different than you got. Yeah, well, that's normal, right? So that's what I try to do with these books is I try to take them and break them down for you. Now, a lot of times we just take the book and we take the whole book and we break it down on a Wednesday. Like last week was the Walls Protocol by Dr. Terry Walls for anybody who's got MS or dealing with MS or autoimmune really altogether type problems. You can go back to last Wednesday to the Rock Health and Wellness Center's Facebook page or YouTube at Health from the Rock, or you can catch us on X at Jason Clemmons DC, and all those videos are archived there for you. So if you want to listen to it and learn about what Dr. Walls did to treat her MS, you can go back to last Wednesday's show. 2 Wednesdays ago, we did Jordan Rubin's The Maker's Diet for Crohn's disease. He had Crohn's disease, and so he was just about to die with that, and went to 30-something doctors all over the world, I think is what he said, and finally figured out how to get that solved and get his gut microbiome back intact so that he could function properly. So we've done some good books. We've done them on Alzheimer's. We've done it on dopamine. We've done it on brain. I'm holding back on my very favorite one, and I'm trying to decide exactly what to do with it. I'm thinking maybe in January we'll attack it, and it's The Master and His Emissary. And The Master and His Emissary book, this one right here, if you're watching, that's this Behind the Bible. This is my favorite book that I've ever read in my entire life. I absolutely love this book. It's given me more wisdom than any other book that I've ever read, and it's explained chiropractic in a way that I've never had it explained to me. And Ian McGilchrist did a fantastic job with this book. So we might it might take us the entire year of next year to break this book down. We might have to do paragraph by paragraph on Wednesdays to get this book broken down. But I just want to make sure that we kind of line it all up right before we do. It's It's a fantastic book. People are always asking me. I've had it 2 times this week. I've had someone ask me, "Is there anything I can read that kind of explains what you're talking about?" And um, man, that's a hard thing to do because that's 23 hard years of study that that I've been working on some of this stuff, and you know what it's like in your profession. It overlaps. I had a grocery store guy in here today. He said, "I really need to get my wife in here so you can explain this." I try to go home and explain it to her, but you just do a better job of explaining it. And I was like, "Yeah, but I wouldn't know anything about how to explain the grocery business." And he just kind of laughed. And I don't know anything about cars. I can't explain to you about what it's like to be a mechanic, and I don't know how much about. Obviously, I don't know much about business. You think I'd have a better show by now if I did, but there's a lot of things that I don't know anything about. But there are some things that I know something about, and I know a little bit about functional neurology and how your brain works and how it relates to health. And that's why I absolutely love this book, The Master and His Emissary. So when we get into it, um, it might be something. It's even something I think you could read it if you even if you weren't a doctor, if you hadn't studied it from that standpoint. It's rather simple to read. There might be a few areas of the brain that he talks about that gets complicated, but I had one I had one other doctor I actually recommended it to, and I asked him to get him to read it, and he got his own version of the book, and it was so funny because he brought it into me and gave it to me. He's like, he's a 70-year-old guy, and he's like, "Nope, that's too complicated. I'm not." That made my brain hurt trying to read all that. So I just kind of laughed. It was really funny. But anyway, but tonight's book, the body book, is different. It's different than all the ones that we broke down because what I usually do is take one book. I take the book and I use one show and break down the entire book. Well, I love this body book so much, The Body by Bill Bryson, that he has so much jam packed into the entire thing, and he breaks down each part of our body. And tonight we're going to talk about the head. So I think this is chapter 5 in the book. Yeah, chapter 5, the head. And um, it'll get your attention right here. I'll just read this opening paragraph because it'll get your attention enough you'll be like, maybe I should watch this show tonight. But he says, we all know that you can't live without your head, but how long exactly is a question that received rather a lot of attention in the late 18th century. It was a good time to wonder because the French Revolution gave inquiring minds a steady supply of freshly lopped heads to examine. I know that's gruesome right there. It's not good. A decapitated head will still have some oxygenated blood in it, so loss of consciousness may not be instantaneous. Estimates of how long the brain can keep working range from 2 seconds to 7, and that is assuming a clean removal, which by no means was always the case. Heads don't come off easily, even with stout blows from especially sharpened axe wielded by an expert. I know that might be a little bit gruesome for a Wednesday night, but I love that Bill Bryson book, man. He's just funny. He's funny what the things that he'll break down for us. So he's going to talk about the head, and you're going to learn some things about your head that you might not have learned before. So we're going to get into that. But first, the article of the day was brought to me by one of my patients, and it's a really interesting thought. I didn't get to it in the last show, and last night's show. Thank you for you guys that gave me feedback on that. Last night's show was a makeup. It was a second. It wasn't a makeup. It was a second version of Monday night's show because I got a little sideways on Monday night show, and so I really thought last night we did a better job of telling that story and giving that information. So if you want to hear a pretty good show, you can go back and watch last night's show. But this is an article, and it's not a scientific article. It's in Men's Health that was actually brought to me. It was I had a patient bring this article in, and because we've all heard since we were little kids that ice is the best thing to do. Put ice on it. If it's hurt, sprain your ankle, put ice on it. If you got a low back problem, put ice on it. But like if your shoulder's hurting, put ice on it, right? And when I graduated chiropractic school, one of my really good friends, his name is John Conde. He owns the Conde Center for Chiropractic Neurology in Delray Beach, Florida. He is a board certified chiropractic neurologist, super smart dude. He was the valedictorian of our class, and he's as good a dude as he is smart. So I love Dr. Conde, and he's a good friend of mine, and we keep in touch. He's a Miami Hurricane, and so it's kind of fun to talk to him about during football season and things. But he's always been very open and helped me. But when I first got out of chiropractic school, I had a little bit of experience in chiropractic, so I helped some of my friends get started in their offices, and Dr. Conde was one of them. So I went to South Florida a couple of different trips and spent a few days with him and helped him get his office started. And one day I was in there and he was telling people that he was telling them to put heat on their low backs that were having trouble. And there was like 3 or 4 patients in a morning or something that he had mentioned using heat. So when we went to lunch, I asked him, I said, John, why do you keep recommending heat? Shouldn't these people have put ice on their low back? And he just hit me right in the chest with a philosophical punch. Really a scientific punch. He said, hey, what does ice do to the nervous system? And I said, well, it slows it down. And he said, what does heat do to the nervous system? And I said, well, it speeds it up. And he said, well, what does the healing? And I said, the nervous system. And he said, well, what do you want to do? Speed it up or slow it down? And I was like, man, that was kind of I think I've told that story before, but that's kind of it was one of those moments when a lot of times the things that we do and the things that we've done and the things that our parents did and the things that our grandparents did and the things that our coach did when we were in high school or in the 7th grade or whatever, we really don't understand why they did it. They don't even understand why they did it. They did it because their parents did it or their coaches did it or whatever. Or maybe it was the science of the time, but there's some debate, and that debate has some merit, and it might not always be the best thing to ice everything. And so this article is the cold, hard truth about. And so for decades, you've iced everything from sprained ankles to sore muscles, thinking it would help. But what if all the cold is actually slowing down the healing process? So this is about 19 years later. 19 years later, after Dr. Conde checked me on that and corrected me with my philosophy, and now all of a sudden I have a patient come in that brings this article in, and you've been told that reducing swelling speeds up healing and helps you recover from hard workouts that batter your body. But that might not be true. We've all seen them. We've seen LeBron James. We've seen Michael Jordan. We've seen those Peyton Manning and all that stuff with their pitchers with their elbows wrapped up after a game, or the NBA guys with ice on their knees, or any of that stuff, right? Well, you think you're doing it right, just as all those pros, but it's been 50 plus years since Los Angeles Dodger pitcher legend Sandy Koufax appeared in a Sports Illustrated photograph with his left arm submerged in a vat of ice. An iconic moment in sports. Since then, no piece of published peer-reviewed research has shown decisively that ice is beneficial to the healing process. In fact, many studies have shown the opposite. And that's what I got shown 19 years ago. And I really do think it's true. I don't like to recommend ice hardly at all. The only time I recommend ice in my office is when someone's trying to control pain. And when they just are hurting so bad that they're trying to control the pain and they're just about to take a Tylenol or an Aleve or something like that has negative consequences to your liver and your kidneys, then I'll say, okay, use some ice. I personally believe you should not use either one. Just leave it alone. The body will fix it. But if you needed to use something, I think heat is what we recommend always. Heat first, unless you just can't stand it. and then use the ice because then the ice is going to dull the pain. It's going to knock down the pain. But so here's a brief history of where we went wrong. It says the procedure for injury management followed by most doctors, physical therapists, and athletic trainers hasn't changed since 1978 when sports medicine physician Gabe Merkin, MD, coined the phrase the RICE protocol in capital letters, RICE. And the RICE protocol is rest, ice, compression, elevation, right? Those are the things that we would do to, if you had, let's say you sprained your ankle, right? That's what we've been told to do. The acronym stands for those things. It's taught in medical and physical therapy schools and is listed on the National Institutes of Health website as the top treatment for both acute and chronic sports injuries. Rick Wright, MD, an NHL grantee and physician, formerly with the St. Louis Blues, the Cardinals, and Rams, still swears by it. So you've got some debate between whether or not we should use ice or we shouldn't use ice. But Dr. Wright believes that ice is the best modality to control pain, swelling, and inflammation. And I'm not necessarily arguing with that. To control pain, swelling, and inflammation, maybe that's true, but maybe that's not what we need to do. Maybe controlling pain and controlling swelling and controlling inflammation is maybe swelling and inflammation is part of the healing process. So I think what he's saying, his argument that it's ice is the best modality to control pain, swelling, and inflammation, I'm not going to argue with that. I don't know that it's necessarily healing. And so, especially if you ice for 25 to 30 minutes so you can get actual cooling of the tissue and decrease inflammation, as opposed to shorter periods where you can get a rebound response, says Dr. Wright, who is currently the chair of Department of Orthopedic Surgery at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. He believes nothing else has been definitely proven to work better. No argument. I don't have the argument that you can knock down pain. It's great. But even yet, Dr. Merkin now disagrees. So Dr. Merkin was the guy in 1978 that coined the term RICE, rest, ice, compression, and elevation. But he now disagrees, so much that he co-wrote the foreword to the second edition of Gary Round's 2013 published book, Iced, The Illusionary Treatment Option, which has become the Bible for growing anti-ice movement. This is quote, my RICE guidelines have been used for decades, but new research shows rest and ice actually delay healing and recovery, says Dr. Merkin. He's now 84 years old. Good for him. Number one, he's 84 years old and he's still rocking. He's still getting after it out there. Number two, he's not too proud to stick to something and not change once he learns better science or better information. Good for him. So, but he really believes that now the rest and the ice actually delay the healing. Yes, if your muscles are sore, you can relieve pain with ice. See, there's no argument there. But the inflammation causes that soreness. But the inflammation causing that soreness is in fact bringing healing to the body. I agree with that. By icing, you dampen the immune response. Remember, we've talked about that since the very first day on the show, that inflammation was the initial stage of the immune response. And so with ice, you dampen that immune response, he says. Quote, you think you're recovering faster, but science has shown you're not. So did Dr. Merkin conceive RICE? So how did Dr. Merkin conceive RICE? Possibly indirectly thanks to a freckled-faced 12-year-old named Everett Knowles, who in 1962 tried to hop a freight train in Somerville, Massachusetts. As he did, his right shoulder smashed into the stone wall, severing his arm. The boy was rushed to Massachusetts General Hospital, where Harvard-educated surgeon Ronald Malt, MD, made a historic play. While deciding how to reattach Knowles' arm, the first time such an operation would be successful, Dr. Malt put the appendage on ice. Interesting, right? So it came from a trauma. It came from a trauma and a trauma surgeon that started that whole thing. Doctors began using the same protocol to treat all damaged tissue, especially in the sports world. Dr. Merkin's now outdated book simply reported the anecdotal evidence. In 1978, this is a quote, in 1978, inflammation was even in researched literature, but everyone was resting, putting people in casts, wrapping things tightly with ice, Dr. Merkin says. There had been an extensive research there hadn't been extensive research, and because rest, ice, and compression wasn't just wasn't that catchy, and a gravitational assist can help the body reabsorb blood and fluid. Dr. Merkin added E to the end for elevation. It made for a fine slogan: "Rice is nice." Well, see how funny that is. See how that's our world we live in. That's the world we live in of the way that medicine evolves in some things. It's just one guy. That's what these first few chapters of the body have told us, right? So that we don't. It's not necessarily the proper way. It's just a way that got used up for years and years. So the case against cold. So the case against cold. Remember when your school nurse told you to ice your ankle when you rolled it at recess? Did she tell you to chill it for 5 minutes, 10, 20? Was it cubes in a bag or chips in a towel? Regardless, that nurse was right about exactly one thing. No study can dispute that ice is the cheapest, safest, and most readily available non habit forming way to relieve pain. That's what I agree with right there. And I could have given you my whole philosophy on ice and heat before I even read this article, and then this article basically says that same thing. There's no argument it relieves pain because it slows down the nervous system. But be warned, the pain will return once the tissue rewarms and the inflammation response resumes. That's because this response needs to happen. The three stages of healing for soft tissue injuries are now universally accepted by the medical community: inflammation, repair, and remodeling. And you can't reach the last two without phase one. You need that inflammation. It's not a good idea to stop the inflammation of a injured tissue. It's a good idea to stop the inflammation, chronic inflammation that ruins your body. But in an injury, that inflammation is there to start that cascade of events, to start that healing process. When tissue is damaged, the immune system initiates that inflammatory response. In 2010, a study published in the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology journal showed that it's necessary in order to heal damaged tissue and repair muscle in mice. The body deploys its repair and cleanup crew in the form of macrophages, a type of white blood cell that removes dead cells and tissue debris. They produce the protein called insulin like growth factor 1, which is required for muscle repair and regeneration. So, blocking the inflammatory response impedes healing by preventing the release of IGF 1. Ice does that by constricting blood vessels, allowing less fluid to reach the injured area. In a 2013 study in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research found that topically cooling delays recovery from eccentric exercise induced muscle damage. When you work out and you create muscle damage and then you ice your body down, that actually delays the healing. In a 2015 article in Knee Surgery, a 2015 article in Knee Surgery, Sports Traumatology, Arthroscopy showed that narrowing of the blood vessels caused by icing persists after cooling ends. The resulting restriction can kill otherwise healthy tissue, adding more damage on top of the existing injury. This isn't just about serious injuries either. It's about the way you recover from workouts. Having sore quads because of a workout is different from having a torn quadricep by only degrees. In 2015, a study published in the Journal of Physiology found that regular cold water immersion after strength training, ice baths, substantially lessened long-term gains in muscle mass and strength by stunting the cell activity crucial for building stronger muscles. When you hit the cold tub after strength exercise, thinking you are reducing inflammation, you are instead delaying recovery. So it's interesting. Inflammation and swelling have been deemed the enemy, but only swelling is actually bad. When you recruit inflammatory markers to an acutely injured area, that comes with fluid, says Joshua Apple, MD, an Air Force fight surgeon and chief of emergency medicine at Southern Arizona VA Hospital or healthcare system. The body knows how to heal itself. So you're not getting too much fluid, but you can have enough, um, but you can have not enough evacuation. So the lymphatic system is the other part that goes along with this. See if I got just got one little 1 minute left to get to this right here. But the lymphatic system, through a passive system, fully reliant on muscle activation, movement is necessary for proper fluid through the vessel. Sitting still with an ice pack creates the exact opposite effect. With an acute injury, you want to get the good stuff in and the bad stuff out. The only way to do that is through movement. Yeah, that's a good lesson right there. That's what you want to do is you want to get that movement going. And so just a thought for you, some science right there. Maybe icing everything isn't the best way to go. Maybe trying to figure out how your nervous system functions is a better way to go. And by doing that, you can actually heal faster from these acute type injuries. So maybe a heat is a better way of going than ice. Just want to let you consider that. And um, we'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. For the Facebook group, there's one last page to this. So, um, pushing a sprained ankle may sound ill advised, but in a 1999 study published in the Journal of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, showed that for those with musculoskeletal injuries or who have undergone surgery, loading damaged tissue, that is, applying force to it, accelerates healing for bone and muscle tissue. Moving sore muscles can be easy. Corey Kluber, a two-time American League Cy Young Award winner, has iced his arm only once in the past 7 or 8 years as a pitcher. So he's one of the best pitchers it was in the major leagues. Instead, he does light resistance exercises that target his rotator cuff muscles after he pitches, naturally activating muscles and moving fluid out of the tissue damage during his starts. When I was younger, I iced because that's what people did. That's what we were told to do. I did exactly the same thing when I played quarterback in college. I come in after practice, put my elbow in an ice bucket, and it really wasn't necessary. I didn't know it at the time. So, acute injuries are more complicated. No, you don't want to squat 350 pounds on a torn ACL, but let's say you sprain your ankle. If your physical therapist clears you to stand on it, don't hesitate to do so. We actually do that with sprained ankles here in the office. We take the sprained ankles and we use AMIT, the Advanced Muscle Integration Technique, to address them, and we turn the muscles back on, and then we want you to get up and walk immediately and we'll do that. We want that activation and we want that movement to happen. Now, you don't want to, if it's a fracture, that's a different thing. What we're talking about here is soft tissue injury. That's why walking is so awesome for your brain. That's what it does is it drives your brain first. Walking is great for if I get you to walk, you can be better. One of my patients in Littlefield yesterday told me she got COVID, and one of the things she did is they walked every day. Now I know COVID is not the same as it was, but she'd never had it before, and this is the first time she'd ever gotten COVID. And so that's that's something that she got up and walked, and and she said she handled it super great. She didn't, it was there wasn't much to it, but that's the same thing I did when I had it. I got up and walked every day, and it's the same thing with SI joint pain, ankle problems, foot pain, any of that stuff that you have. If you can get that joint moving, movement inhibits pain. Movement drives lymph drainage. It decreases swelling, so you can get the swelling out of the area, and you can naturally do that. That's what we would have done in the old days had we actually hurt ourselves. So anyway, thought that was a great article. Thank you, Karen, for bringing that to me. And Um, that's all I have for that. Let me get back to the show here. Hey, everybody, we're back. This is Jason Clemmons, Doctor of Chiropractic at the Rock Health and Wellness Center, and you are listening to Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. That was a great article on hot and cold. You guys, you can take that for what you want and go back and listen to it again if you'd like to. And so, the second half of the show, I'd like to get into the body, and I'd just like to read some of this chapter 5. And we started off right there talking about in chapter 5, and it's about the head. We won't get through all the chapter, but we'll get through some of the highlighted parts and see right there. And he's talking about how long you can actually live um, decapitated. You're not going to live long, but you don't actually die immediately. Is the idea? As Frances Larson notes in her fascinating history of decapitation, severed Mary, Queen of Scots, needed 3 hearty whacks before her head hit the basket, and hers was a comparatively delicate neck. I don't know what to think of that. That's pretty crazy right there. But we'll move power to that right there. No other part of the body has received more misguided attention or proved more resilient to scientific understanding than the head. The 19th century, in particular, was something of a golden age in this respect. The period saw the rise of 2 distinct but often confused disciplines: phrenology and craniometry. Phrenology is the practice of correlating bumps on a skull with mental powers and attributes of character, and it is always a marginal pursuit. Craniometrists, virtually without exception, dismissed phrenology as crackpot science while promulgating an alternative nonsense of their own. Craniometry focused on more precise and comprehensive measurements of volume, shape, and structure of the head and brain, but in pursuit, it must be said, of equally preposterous conclusions. So we've been doing stuff. We've been doing things for a long time, and some of this stuff is ridiculous, right? Um, the greatest cranial enthusiast of all, now forgotten but once very famous indeed, was Bernard Davis. He lived from 1801 to 1881. A doctor in the English Midlands, Davis became gripped by craniometry in the 1840s and rapidly made himself into the world's supreme authority. He produced a stream of books with weighty titles on the peculiar crania, the inhabitants of certain groups of islands in the Western Pacific, and another book, Contributions Towards Determining the Weight of the Brain in Different Race of Man. These were surprisingly popular. On Synostich Crania among Aboriginal Race of Man went through 15 editions. This guy did some work. He did some work on there. Gradually, he built up the world's largest collection of skulls, 1,540 in all, more than all the skulls in all the world's other institutions combined. Davis would stop at almost nothing to enlarge his collection. When he wished for skulls from the indigenous people of Tasmania, he wrote to George Robinson, official protector of Aborigines, for a selection. Because of the plundering of Aboriginal graves had by this time become a criminal act, Davis supplied Robinson with detailed instructions on how to remove a skull from an indigenous Tasmanian and replace it with a skull of any convenient surrogate in the way that would avoid arousing suspicion. Yeah. Conspiracy, right? Conspiracy and government directed problems. Yeah, is not a new problem. But those things that we're dealing with today are not new. They've been around for a long, long time. Davis' fundamental ambition was to prove that dark-skinned people were created separately from light-skinned people. He was convinced that a person's intellect and moral compass were indelibly written in the curves and apertures of the skull, and that they were exclusively products of race and class. People with cephalic peculiarities should be treated not as criminals, but as dangerous idiots. He suggested in 1878, at the age of 77, he married a woman 50 years his junior. What her cranium was like is unknown. Yes. The instinct of the part of the European authorities to prove all other races inferior was widespread, if not universal. In England in 1866, the eminent physician John Langdon Hayden Down, 1828 to 96, first described the condition that we now know as Down syndrome in a paper called Observations on an Ethnic Classification of Idiots. But he referred to it as Mongolism, as its victim and its victims as mongoloid idiots, in the belief that they were suffering an innate regression to an inferior Asiatic type. Down believed, and no one seems to have doubted him, that idiocy and ethnicity were conjoined qualities. He also listed Malay and Negroid as regressive types. It's hard to get over some of this stuff now. Some of this stuff is just like, man, that's where we came from. Like that's what we actually that's where some of the foundational principles comes from. In Italy, meanwhile, Lombroso, the country's most eminent physiologist, developed a parallel theory called criminal anthropology. Lombroso believed that criminals were evolutionary throwbacks and who betrayed their criminal instincts through a range of anatomical features. Slopes of the forehead, whether the earlobes were rounded or spade shaped, even the amount of space between the toes. People with a lot of toe space were closer to apes, he explained. Through his assertions, though his assertions were without the faintest scientific validity, Lombroso was widely esteemed and is even now sometimes referred to as the father of modern criminology. Lombroso was frequently called as an expert witness. In one case, cited by Stephen Jay Gould in the Mismeasure of Man, he was asked to determine which two men had killed a woman. Lombroso declared one man self-evidently guilty because he had enormous jaws, frontal sinuses, and zygomatica, thin upper lip, huge incisors, and unusually large head, and tactile obtuseness with sensory manicism. Never mind that no one knew what much of that meant, nor can any of us, maybe some of us can't even say it today. And there was no actual evidence against the poor fellow. He was found guilty. This dude was working, this guy was from 1835 to 1909. So he asked him, he was called to trial to say which one of the guys is guilty. And he made up some crap and he measured the guy's forehead and his jaw size. And he's like, this guy must be guilty. I wonder how much different we are today from some of those thoughts, right? But the most influential and unexpected practitioner of craniometry was the great French anatomist Pierre-Paul Broca. Broca was without question a brilliant scientist. In 1861, during an autopsy on a stroke victim who hadn't spoken for years except to repeat endlessly the syllable tan, Broca discovered the brain speech center in the frontal lobe, the first time that anyone had connected the area of the brain to a specific action. The speech center is still called Broca's area, and the impediment Broca discovered is Broca's aphasia. Under it, a person can understand speech but can't reply except to utter meaningless noises or something stock phrases like "I'll say" or "oh boy." Right? That's something, and that's on that left side right there, and that's something that we can learn from the book because if you have a stroke on your left side, or if you have a tumor on your left side, then you will be able to understand language because you understand that language through the right side. And then, but when the right side tries to explain that to the left side, then the left side's not going to be able to speak. And that was Dr. Broca, that Pierre-Paul Broca right there, 1824 to 1880. He was the one that did that. So Broca was less astute, however, with respect to character traits. He was convinced, even when all the evidence was against him, that females, criminals, and dark-skinned foreigners had smaller, less agile brains than their white male counterparts. Whenever Broca was presented with evidence that contradicted this, he disregarded it on the grounds that it must be flawed. He was similarly disinclined to believe a study from Germany showing that German brains were on average 100 grams weightier than French ones. He explained this awkward discrepancy by suggesting that French subjects were very old when tested and their brains had shrunk. The degree of decadence that old age can impose upon brains is very variable, he says. He also had a problem with accounting for why accused criminals sometimes had big brains and decided that their brains had become artificially engorged by the stress of hanging. The greatest indignity of all came when Broca's own brain was measured upon his death and was found to be smaller than average. There you go. So even some of the guys that have really contributed to the history of our brain had things wrong sometimes. Like there'll be that's I've laughed a lot of times in chiropractic because I've often said I'll get to the end of my life and I'll get to heaven and I'll ask Jesus about exactly how all this worked, and I'll find out that all these things that I thought were working is not what was working. It was maybe it was just something totally different. And so that's it's good to read these stories and learn from them, because Broca's aphasia is something we talk about today. Dr. Broca, in one sentence, Dr. Broca was a genius, and in another sentence, Dr. Broca was a blithering idiot. Like he went from one side to the other, and so you know we can take a little bit of this. We can be mature as we're groaning, right? We can be mature as we're going through the wilderness. We know that there's going to be some. We can give people a little bit of slack. We can work on it a little bit. The person who finally put the study of the human head on something like sound scientific foundation was none other than the great Charles Darwin. In 1872, 13 years after he published On the Origin of Species, Darwin produced another landmark work, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, which looked at expressions reasonably and without prejudice. The book was revolutionary not just for being sensible, but for observing that certain expressions appeared to be common for all people. This was a much bolder utterance than we realize today because it underlined Darwin's conviction that all people, whatever their race, have a common heritage, and that was a revolutionary thought in 1872. What Darwin realized was something that all babies know instinctively, that the human face is highly expressive and instantly captivating. No two authorities seem to agree on quite how many expressions we can make. Estimates range from 4,100 to 10,000, but it is clearly a large number. More than 40 muscles, a significant portion of the body's total, are involved in facial expression. Babies fresh from the womb are said to prefer a face or even a general pattern of a face to any other shape. That's innate intelligence. That's innate intelligence right there. Whole regions of the brain are devoted solely to recognizing faces. We are exquisitely sensitive to the subtlest alterations of mood or expression, even if we are not always conscious of them. In an experiment related by Daniel McNeil in his book, The Face, men were shown two photos of women that were identical in every respect except the pupils had been subtly enlarged in one. Although the change was too slight to be consciously perceived, the test subjects invariably found the woman with the larger pupils more attractive, though they were at a loss to explain why. That's a good lesson for us right there on how many different expressions we actually have. And one thing that I will confess that I can feel myself defending it right now. I can tell you right now, before I even start to confess it, I'm going to defend it. But I've known Leslie since she was 12, and I've been in love with Leslie since I was 16, and I'm now 53. And I think she's as beautiful today as she's ever been, and I'm in love with her as much today as I've ever been. And but I've known her for quite some time now, 36, 7, I don't know how many years that's been. But I've known her since she was 12. she has a lot of facial expressions. And over the years, one of the things that I have done is I have put a definition on those expressions. I think they mean something. I think those definitions mean something. And the part I'm going to defend is that I really do think I'm right on that deal. I think I'm. She won't say that. She won't tell me the truth. She won't really tell me what those facial expressions mean. But I think they actually mean something. But I will admit that I could be wrong, and I could be reading those facial expressions in my own definitions, not in the way that she means them. And when I do that, it creates tension between the two of us. It creates defense on her part. It creates irritation. I'm trying to figure out what that means. What did that look mean? Right? And there's a bunch of expressions, and maybe I will just present for consideration that maybe those expressions that I have defined in a certain manner, they don't mean what I think they mean. And according to the book, there can be up to, you can be as many as 10,000 facial expressions right there. So, you know, you it's maybe they mean something and maybe they don't. What Dr. McGilchrist explained to me in The Master and His Emissary is that actually one half of your brain processes the top part of a face, and the other half of your brain processes the lower part of your face. And it's in it, and so that's why when what was so hard during this whole COVID thing with the mask, and especially with kids in mask, is the kids are trying to learn how to read faces, and that's a two-sided brain thing. It's a right side brain and a left side brain, depending on of the upper part of the face and the lower part of the face. And when you cover half the face and then you ask someone to read the expression, you're only getting half the brain input. You're only activating half of the brain. So I don't think we did a service to ourselves from the big picture standpoint by all that masking stuff that we did. So you're causing some developmental issues that you didn't even understand, that none of us really understood, except for those people that study it. In the 1960s, nearly a century after Darwin wrote The Expression of the Emotions, Paul Ekman, a professor of psychology at the University of California at San Francisco, decided to test the universality of of facial expressions by studying remote tribal people in New Guinea who had no acquaintances with Western habits. Ekman concluded that 6 expressions are universal: fear, anger, surprise, pleasure, disgust, and sorrow. The most universal expression of all is a smile, which is rather a nice thought. No society has ever been found that doesn't respond to smiles in the same way. True smiles are brief, between 2/3 of a second and 4 seconds. That's why a held smile begins to look menacing. A true smile is the one expression that we cannot fake. As the French anatomist G.B. Duchesne de whatever, I don't know French. This guy, GB, noticed a long ago in 1862, a genuine, spontaneous smile involves the contraction of the orbicularis oculi muscles in the eye, and we have no independent control over those muscles. You can make your mouth smile, but you can't make your eyes sparkle with joy. So that's kind of a cool thing. A smile is universal. A smile can speak to all languages, to all people, always. It's not a bad thing to smile. I get accused of not smiling enough. According to Paul Ekman, we all indulge in micro expressions, flashes of emotion, no more than a quarter of a second in duration, that betray our true inner feelings, regardless of what our more general, controlled expression is conveying. That's what I say about Leslie. It's those micro expressions that are saying something. Nearly all of us miss these telltale expressions, according to Ekman, but we can be taught to spot them, assuming we know what workmates and loved ones really think of us. Yeah, be careful. Be careful about studying that. You might want to just hold off on that one right there. Yeah. By primate standards, we have a very odd head. Our faces are flat, our foreheads high, our noses protuberant. Almost certainly, a number of factors are responsible for our distinct facial arrangement. Our upright posture, our biggest brain, our diet and lifestyle, the fact that we are built for sustained running, which affects how we breathe, and things that we find adorable in a mate. Dimples, for instance, not something that gorillas look for when feeling frisky. Surprisingly, given how central our faces are to existence, quite a lot about them is still a mystery to us. Take eyebrows. All the many species of hominids that preceded us had prominent brow ridges, but we Homo sapiens have gave them up in favor of our small, active eyebrows. Yeah, be careful. You just got to let them work some of this stuff out, right? It's not easy to say why. One theory is that eyebrows are there to keep sweat out of our eyes, but what the eyebrows do really well is convey feeling. Think how many messages you can send with a single arched eyebrow, from "I find that hard to believe" to "watch your step" to "care to have sex." One of the reasons Mona Lisa looks um, enigmatic is that she has no eyebrows. In one interesting experiment, subjects were shown two sets of digitally doctored photographs of well known people, one with eyebrows eliminated and the other with eyebrows themselves. One with eyebrows eliminated and the other with eyes themselves taken away. Surprisingly, but overwhelmingly, volunteers found it harder to identify the celebrities without eyebrows than without eyes. How interesting is that? You can take your eyebrows away, and it's more hard to distinguish who you are than if you take your eyes away. Hmm. Eyelashes are similarly uncertain. There is some evidence to suggest that eyelashes subtly change airflow around the eye, helping to waft away motes of dust and other tiny particles from landing there. But the main benefit is probably that they add interest and allure to faces. People with long eyelashes are generally related or rated to be more attractive than those without. I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that a lot of girls go get their eyelashes done, whatever that means. Even more anomalous is the nose. It is the convention among mammals to have snouts, not round, projecting noses. According to Daniel Lieberman, a professor at the Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard, our external noses and intricate sinuses evolved to help with breathing efficiently and with keeping us from becoming overheated on long runs. It is an arrangement that has clearly suited us, for humans and their ancestors have had projecting noses for some 2 million years. Most mysterious of all is the chin. The chin is unique to humans, and no one knows why we have one. It doesn't seem to confer any structural benefit to the head, so it may simply be that we find a good chin dashing. Lieberman, in a rare moment of lightness, observed, "Testing this last hypothesis is especially difficult, but the reader is encouraged to think of appropriate experiments." It is certainly the case that we talk about chinless wonders and otherwise equate modest chins to deficiency in character and intellect. Kind of interesting. If you just think about all the different parts of your face and your head, right? Much as we appreciate a pert nose or gorgeous eyes, the real purpose of most of our facial features is to help us interpret the world through our senses. It's curious that we always speak of our five senses because we have no more than that. We have a sense of balance, an acceleration and deceleration of where we are in space that is known as proprioception, the time of time passing, of appetite. Altogether, and depending on how you count them, we have as many as 33 systems within us that let us know where we are and how we are doing. We'll explore the sense of taste in the next chapter. So, um, he gets into sight. He breaks down pretty much the whole head, and maybe we'll go over that. Maybe I'll just stop right here. Gets into sight and hearing and smell and that pretty much does that chapter. So I'll make the bookmark right here. We're going to run out of time for tonight, but I'll make it right here. And the next time we pick up the body, we'll just work through it right there. We'll just take this. There's just every sentence. That's why I think this is such a cool book, is because he's packed every single sentence with something to teach us something. And I think it really does. I think it makes a difference when, in the long run, you can actually understand that, hey, some of the things that we think we know about things is not necessarily true. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you guys enjoyed that show. I hope you learned something about heat and ice tonight, and I hope you enjoyed that about the body. We'll be back tomorrow night at 6 o'clock with Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. Hope you guys have a great evening.